Good afternoon. How are you? Well, it's nice out, although it's about 93, and the humidity is up around 30, and they say the wind is 7 miles an hour. And you know, I do feel it, and I apologize if it's affecting the sound of my voice as I talk into our movable mic, basically my telephone. Well, in the good news category, it's all about Paris. And the thing about Paris is that it's a good news story. A lot of competition, but a good news story. And I know the way people cover it is to count the number of gold medals and who's standing on the platform. And I think we're in an arm wrestling match with China in that category. But the American gymnastic team, for the first time in 16 years, has gotten the gold. So that's who we call out today. Now, I'm not watching it. I just, from time to time, look at what events there are and see if I can catch them. Because like you, I have a real job. So I've been writing a lot today. Now, what's going on in America that's good? Well, for those of us, and there are many of us, who believe Biden was the man. And I'm not saying this against Kamala, but Biden was my candidate. She's my candidate now, but Biden will always be my candidate. And one of the reasons is a couple of things that he's been doing, which are indicative of who he is and what he does and how he goes about it. And I kind of resent these people who say he doesn't know how to give a speech, because when I was younger, they talked about how great he was at public speaking. And I listened to several of those, and I think I've mentioned it once before. I was making my voyage into the center of politics, trying to run for Congress one year, and that was the year he was running, and we were using the same consultant. And so I saw him from time to time. He was always a hail fellow, well met, as cheery in person as I think most people see him on the stage. But he's taken to heart the fact that there are a lot of poor people, minorities, who have large debts, and it is the barrier to them moving on. And so those people who owe this money, Biden has been seeking to find ways to erase that debt. And he's done so for 4 million minority borrowers. And his objective is to do it for 30 million. Now, people don't talk about it. And in part, that's because we live in a nation that wants to pretend that blacks don't exist, women don't exist, and a whole number of things. And when I say that, I'm obviously pointing at the former President Trump and his minions and the vast reach of this kind of discrimination and hate. And it is going further than that, because it seeks to compromise the freedom of so many people other than those it can so easily point at. And when I was a kid, I was closer to those people who had felt discrimination for being Irish and Italian, and there were Jews in our neighborhood. And I've never thought of us as a melting pot, and I probably said that before, but as a collage. Jesse Jackson always talked about it like a quilt, different patches, all bound into one quilt together. Now, there's another kind of freedom that we have to think about, which is all-encompassing, and it is a Supreme Court that no longer respects precedent to follow it, as you or I would have to follow, say, a statute, with the training and skill of a lawyer. You follow decisions that lead to a situation, and that you encompass that new situation by its terms as an extension of the old law. And that may not be a fair way to describe respecting precedents, but I think it's a colloquial way that indicates this is how we do it. The teaching in legal method, first year course, among the basic tools they suggested was read on, basically. So if in the morning somebody came into your office with a case, and in the afternoon another person came in and it was similar, you should start from scratch to see if the difference in the cases made a difference. And that's kind of what you do as a judge. Does it fit squarely in a case that happened before? Yes, fine. So, but we had an overarching decision by the Supreme Court that basically the former president was immune from prosecution. Astonishing. And that has consequences, because what are the limits of a president, notwithstanding the other terms in our Constitution, who can do anything he or she wants without restraint, without recognizing that there are and should be limits, historically, because of how we began. This was the very reason, one of them, the suppression of freedom. Yeah, taxation without representation, but all these things, the details, give us a term for which we respond. So, how do we deal with this? Well, Biden today, at the LBJ Center, where he was in Texas, said, I think we should have term limits for Supreme Court justices. 18 years. That's how he addresses it, because he said, if you can enlarge the court and move the pieces around, then each new president or shift in the party system or who's elected would mean the court was constantly in this kind of turmoil. So, and I think about it, I've been with our law firm, Campbell Flannery, for more than 18 years. So, for a long time I kind of thought of myself that I was in 5-year cycles, it seemed to me. And then you look up one day and you say, wow, I did all that time. And I suppose it says something good about the practice of law that I don't think of it that way normally. Now, those greedy for power and length in office may not like that, but they brought it on themselves. Also, Biden supports a code of conduct, and the question is, we have to make it enforceable. So justices are now going to have to disclose gifts. They're going to have to step back from public appearances. And all federal judges have to recuse themselves when there's a conflict. There's already statutes and law that say that. And the court then might be in a position to work as intended. But we obviously can't rely on the court to police itself. And, we have analogies in history involving our freedoms. And we think in terms of the freedoms that have to do with the franchise, that is our ability to vote, therefore our ability to participate in the government. But if we're not relevant to that participation, if there will be no vote after this election, then we're in a very different place. And so the conversation, and there's not enough of it, the overarching issue is what Biden is addressing right now, today, which is the difference in people. We have poor people who can't enjoy opportunity because of debt, and we're trying to clean that up. But we have people who are treated differently, discriminated against, and that's not a vital element of a society that both exists, survives, and goes forward in the future doing great or wonderful things. So each generation has enlarged in fits and starts, the meaning of freedom, the meaning of equal before the law. Joe Biden had the chance at a respectable law firm to stay there. And he spoke today about how he was encouraged to think about other things. Think about the town council. Later on, to think about the Senate. And he had resisted these things. But before he did either of those, he became a public defender and left the law firm because he wanted to do something to help others. And he was in a state that was segregated. So these are interesting concerns. And so he, if you will, enlisted in the army of people that give a damn about individual rights and liberties. The National Association of Criminal Defense Lawyers, of which I belong, and years ago was a member of their board for a number of years, we describe people who do defense work as liberty's last champions. And that's where Biden started. And he hasn't forgotten where he began. And my friends in New York sometimes, on some of the cases I handle, ask me, why wouldn't I be more comfortable in New York? And I tell them that in a way, in this beautiful state, Virginia, I'm a missionary. I know how it should be done, believe in these principles, and I basically supported Biden because he shared those values. I mean, consider the name of the act that or the constitutional amendment that intends to create. The No One is Above the Law amendment. It goes right to the heart of equality. It goes right to the heart of what Jefferson said. All men are created equal, and women too. And when the Declaration was written, that was not appreciated. And that's the extension that Biden talked about today, and that Johnson mentioned when he passed the Civil Rights Act. And he encouraged people to vote for it, to honor JFK for the sacrifice he made, and the sacrifice that others paid with their life, literally, to have a vote and to be equal. And how an earlier Supreme Court passed a law, or passed a holding, that segregation was not acceptable, Brown against the Board of Education. But enforcing it and making it real happened with a different kind of Republican. Eisenhower, for whatever else you disagree about, finally put his shoulder to the grindstone to make that work. So in our best moments, we have cared to be equal. We have cared that the court be impartial in its application and reading of the law, of the precedents that had passed. And we've had one that was the law for 50 years, that a woman had dominion over her body. But in a way, if you can compare outrage and a miscarriage of our original promise, it is that the Supreme Court says, no, there's no constraints on a president. You know, we have this, as we can see, the right-wing dictatorships populating the rest of the world. So Biden is asking us, what do we want to be? And Biden's working the problem. In a way, I wonder if by working this problem as the president between now and the inauguration of Kamala Harris, that he isn't doing the work of our founders, the work he set out to do when he decided to be a public defender, the work that he did, the good work that he did as the chairman of Judiciary, criticisms aside, that he paired with Kamala Harris, that he's appointed to the court itself people worthy of his declarations now. So what I'm saying is there are a lot of issues to talk about. Weird doesn't catch it. but to say discrimination does. The Supreme Court said so. Doesn't settle the question that we must correct. And sure, there's a real problem getting our Congress to approve these things. And we're talking about a new Congress, because this Congress, by the Republicans, has done all that it can to paralyze good works, if you will. But if we, the voters, we, the people, as identified in the Constitution, do our hard work and push our elected representatives to do the same, then we can make a difference in the House and the Senate. So those are a few thoughts I have on this warm day in my cathedral of trees. All the best. Bye-bye.